I love the fact that you got there. Just one word question. Was this product the product that existed at HVMN prior to you getting there, or have you evolved the product line?
We have evolved. So in 2017, HVMN brought to the world first ever ketone ester drink.
So let me stop you. So this is just, again, from my understanding, Sheryl knows this already. She's done the research. There's all these words out there, esters and salts and endogenous ketones and exogenous ketones. And is this a widget looking for an application, or is there an application looking for the way? Could you declutter the whole space for me? And let's go back to just basic science. If you can take it from fat, cut fat up into carbon molecules down to what the basic carbon molecules are that fall into that ketone space, as it separates from medium chain, as it separates from long chain, and then how you've evolved the specific form of ketone ester that is involved, or is it an ester that's involved in KETONE-IQ? Can you just dumb that down for me? And remember, I'm a surgeon, so take me back to my alphabetic roots, please.
Yeah, sure. So let's start with endogenous ketone. Like you said, endogenous, we're talking about inside the body, where your body creates your own ketones from fat, as you said. So when you're on a ketone,
and anywhere else, do ketones?
It's mainly the liver. And the funny brain, I think the brain does. They have found that the brain does synthesize a certain number, a small amount of ketones, but the main site of production is the liver. And the fun fact is that even though liver is the main site of producing ketones, they actually lack the enzyme to metabolize ketones. So
yeah, the liver is dependent on glucose for energy.
Yeah. So when you are on ketogenic diet, you are consuming a high amount of fat, and you have the carbohydrate restrictions, which means you have a chronically lower amount of insulin being secreted, and that sort of gives the cue for the liver to create ketones from fat. And fat is a long sort of chain of carbons attached with hydrogen and occasionally hydroxyl group, if I believe correctly, or the saturated bond for saturated fats, and then there are some unsaturated fat for the carbon chains that are double bond. So beta oxidation essentially cuts that long carbon chain into smaller segments, and then at some point you create a molecule with 4 carbon, that's beta hydroxybutyrate, that gets converted into acetoacetate, that gets converted into acetyl-CoA, and this is what enters the Krebs cycle to be metabolized to form energy via the electron transport chain. Now that's beta hydroxybutyrate. However, beta hydroxybutyrate is also an acid, beta hydroxybutyric acid. So there are supplements out there that are BHB, but because of its acidic nature, you can't consume too much of it, or else you'll have GI issues.
What GI issues do people get? What can they expect?
Stomach ache, diarrhea, vomiting, just general acid reflux. That sort of it's just quite painful.
You know why that happens? What
just high acid load. I think that is mainly why. It's just you drinking too high of a too much acidic sort of drink. That sort of similar reaction would occur.
You don't think it's a hormonal trigger though? It's not a GLP or an incretin trigger? Because
that is an interesting thought, but I don't think anyone has proven that yet.
The reason I'm asking is, the stomach pH is between 2 and 4. The human stomach is one of the most acidic stomachs of any mammal, and I can understand the esophageal acidity, like ACV, apple cider vinegar, but once it hits the stomach, that acidity should be tolerable. And I just wonder if it's not a molecule that triggers, because we know the fats trigger GLP-1. And that it's more hormonal response. GLP-1 triggering by fat, if you overeat it, causes tremendous GI upset as well.
Right.
The same thing, the queasiness and everything else. I'm just thinking tangentially more from a clinical perspective.
Yeah, no, another thing I could think of is that, consuming BHB also increases your blood acidity or drop your blood pH. That could be an adverse reaction that cause all of your system trying to excrete out whatever that you've consumed. That could be also why. And you're right, like it could be anything from signaling to hormonal. And yeah, we don't know. But
the only other comment there is that one of the reasons I take it in my obesogenic brain is for appetite suppression, and it helps me to get through the day. I haven't eaten today since last night 9 o'clock, and I've had a couple of these, and they carry me through the day because there's a powerful appetite suppression. Well, GLP-1 agonists are used, the Trulicity, the Ozempics are used to suppress appetite as well. And do you know if there's a central appetite suppression with the exogenous ketone ester? Oh, sorry, exogenous ketones. I'm not going to use
exogenous ketone. Yeah. Also, by the way, since you mentioned Ozempic, is it true that they're running out of supply nationwide?
For several of them, that it is the black market has just gone ballistic with it.
People are using it for weight loss now.
Absolutely, but the problem is with monotherapy, when it fails, they gain all their weight back. But I just wonder if there's not, looking at the GI symptoms, which are very similar to overeating when you're on a GLP-1 agonist. And the central action of appetite suppression, I wonder if there's not a synergistic mechanism. I don't know, but
there are two things that we know for sure in terms of hunger hormone that ketones or exogenous ketones have effect on. One is ghrelin. It does decrease ghrelin, and two, it increases leptin sensitivity in the pituitary gland. Is it pituitary gland or hippocampus? I believe it's pituitary gland. Yeah. So that in and of itself, not only you feel full faster, but you also don't feel hungry. So a lot of people understand like the hunger and full feeling quite synonymously. So when you are not full, you are hungry. When you are hungry, you are not full. But it's actually not that binary. You can actually not feel full, but also not hungry.
Right.
Because there are two different hormones, ghrelin and leptin. So and it turns out that exogenous ketones or ketone ester actually was shown to decrease ghrelin, but R13-butanediol, which is what KETONE-IQ is, shows increased leptin sensitivity in the brain.
Okay, perfect. So that's an avenue to explore, because human biology is actually fairly easy to understand. The pathways are often common, and
yeah,
so it is fat satiety we actually use in our diet approach. And Sheryl, as a dietitian, will tell you that if you increase your fat consumption, particularly saturated fat percentage, you get tremendous early satiety. And I wonder if there's not a synergy there. Be that as may, okay. So take me down the rest of the metabolic.
Yeah. So now we know what ketones are, how we produce ketones ourselves when we are on ketogenic diet or when we are having intermittent fasting. Basically, when we are low on carb resources, we're low on carbohydrate as well as glycogen, and we are low on insulin. And that's when your body starts secreting signals to make sure your liver will produce ketones from fat storage, because that is our main sort of big, a large amount of calories being stored as. And then in, I believe, 2003, DARPA from the Department of Defense essentially funded a research by NIH to look at efficient fuels for military personnel when they're on long and demanding mission. What can actually give them the edge or advantage over the enemies in long and demanding missions? We've got fats, we've got glucose, we've got proteins already. Everyone has access to that. What else can we do? And that was when the research around exogenous ketones come in, and the perspective of using dual source. If you have carbs, but at the same time, if you raise blood ketone levels, you can use ketone at the same time. Fast forward, a decade plus later, in 2017, HVMN partnered with University of Oxford to launch the first ever ketone ester drink. Now, what ketone esters are essentially BHB, so beta hydroxybutyrate, what we talked about, bonded with R13-butanediol in an ester bond. And that is why it's called ketone ester, because of the ester bond. Now, mind you, before that, ketone salt has been around for a while. It's a very simple form of exogenous ketone where it's BHB bound with either magnesium, potassium, or sodium. The problem with ketone salt is that you can't consume too much, or else you increase your salt load. And that's not very good for people with, I was going to say high blood pressure, but then I think the latest sort of research showing that salt may not be responsible for that. But is eventually you also get a GI issue with the increased salt load anyway. So if the goal is to increase your blood BHB level as much as possible, then ketone salt may not be the best option, but it is nonetheless one of the cheapest option. So ketone ester.
For 1 second.
Yeah.
Sheryl, I know you've been sitting there and we've ignored you, but Sheryl has done personal N of 1 experiments with esters and with salts. From a feeling, from a measurement, and I know your fingers are like a porcupine ran into them. What is your understanding and experience with the esters versus the salts versus this product?
Yes, thank you for asking. I am super excited about exogenous ketones for many reasons. The particular avenue that I've been interested in is, can you compare for me if I have someone who's essentially never been in ketosis, and what do these products do for them versus someone who is regularly in ketosis like myself or Dr. CYWES or you? Because, for example, just this morning, upon waking, my fasting blood ketones were 0.6, which is actually kind of low for me, but they were 0.6. And 2 tablespoons of MCT oil got me to a max of 3.2. And so I know that if I take an ester, it's faster and it's higher, but do I need to go higher than 3.2, for example? Particularly when I look at the cost, right? MCT oil is much more approachable than even your product, never mind an ester. So this is kind of my concern for patients. And do you have any experience with like the naive ketone population versus the experienced?
So first of all, let me comment on the range of blood BHB levels, because you are absolutely right. I think there is a Goldilocks zone at which we need our blood BHB to be in order to have all the benefits. And what most research are pointing towards is that for therapeutic users, you need to at least get above 1.0. And for any performance related benefits, you need to get beyond 1.5, ideally at 2 millimolar. So in that sense, that's when ketone salts sort of fall behind, because a lot of research show that they can go up to maybe 1. That's pushing the GI limit already. Whereas ketone ester, on the other hand, pushes you beyond 3. You can get up to 3 to 5. And your question is absolutely valid. Do I need to be that high? In fact, one paper showed that being that high, you actually increase blood acidity, and you increase cardiorespiratory stress biomarkers such as heart rate and breathing rate, because you're so acidic at such short amount of time that your body is trying its hardest to expel it out in the form of carbon dioxide. So when that happens, you are feeling that you're working out harder, but you're not getting that performance edge. So that's on that. So that's why we opt for R1,3-butanediol, which is KETONE-IQ. So our product is essentially half of what ketone ester is. It's, without that ester bond, we're just taking the latter half, the R1,3-butanediol only, which goes to your liver and gets converted into BHB anyway. So it's a much slower release, but it stays in the blood longer. And we found that the elevation of BHB is very comparable to ketone ester, and it's cheaper to produce. And obviously, we're going to talk about the taste. We can't talk about...
Stop you for 1 second, because what you just said is crucial. Because in our space, a lot of people believe more is better. If I can be keto, then carnivore is better. If I can eat 1 ribeye steak, I can eat 20 ribeye steaks. And I see this with vitamin D toxicity. I see it with so many different places. And I love the word of the Goldilocks, that there's a bell curve to this. And I think one of the key things that we've got hammered with by the naive is the word ketoacidosis. But in fact, what you're talking about there is exactly that. It's where ketones acidify the blood. And we see that in our diabetics who they don't have enough insulin, the type 1s, to get sugar into the cells. They have to produce ketones just to survive. And there's a fine line in ketoacidosis. And one of the things about the bloodstream is it's very finely tuned to maintain pH in a very narrow range of around 7.5 and 7.4. And a tiny change in pH has huge changes to blood volume as well as all the electrolytes. So go ahead.
And that's what I tell people. If you look at biology, as you said, our body and our cells and all these enzymes operate at an optimal level as far as pH goes, as far as temperature goes, as far as everything is very tightly regulated. So it doesn't make sense more is better when it comes to biology. You
So
just
where
need
is your
enough.
upper limit for ketones? Where would you begin to raise the red flag in terms of ketosis?
So ketone ester does raise it up to 3 to 5, and some people do experience sort of GI issues with it because of how high it is, and it's dose dependent. So if they start taking more of that, they can reach between 6 to 8 as well. I would say you don't need anything above 2. If you can get somewhere between 1 to 2.5, ideal. Anything more than that, start monitoring how you feel subjectively. And before I forget, Sheryl, I know I have yet to answer your question about the effect on keto adapted people versus non-keto adapted people. The way I see it is that our bodies are already primed to metabolize ketones. We have all the genes that can transcribe into the enzymes that can metabolize ketones, right? Whether or not you are keto adapted, I think that's whether your body can successfully compartmentalize the fat that you're taking, going into the liver and produce ketone at a rate that is reasonable for your body to keep up with the energy demand. But if you are consuming exogenous ketones, that shouldn't matter anyway, because you already have the enzymes readily available to metabolize ketones, and you're not really depending on the production of endogenous ketones by the liver yourself. So in other words, you are actually getting the best of both worlds. It's a biohack and it's of some sort that you don't have to go through the keto flu and keto adapted period in order to benefit from the ketones, either in terms of energy, brain fuel, or in terms of signaling, for any sort of metabolic health purposes.
A couple of questions just come to mind. Just a quick kind of one-line answer. You mentioned this. Do exogenous ketones help with the keto flu for rookies?
So that's the hypothesis, that it does help, because it sort of bridges that stage where you are getting to ketosis but not really high enough. But what we have seen with exogenous ketones, when administered, you get an upregulation of all the related sort of relevant enzymes as well as the transporters. So you get upregulation of MCT, which is monocarboxylase transporter that transport ketones into the cell. You get increase in, I believe, SCOT I can't remember the long name of it. It's and then you also upregulate the conversion enzyme of ketones into acetyl CoA as well.
And the second part is, do exogenous ketones drop your blood sugar? Is there in other words, the higher you go on ketones, is there a commensurate reduction in sugar? And in people that are naive or still insulin resistant, is that a problem?
So there's a recent paper that was published by Professor Jonathan Little in the University of British Columbia. So he basically tested 3 different exogenous ketone products, one of which is KETONE-IQ, the other one is Kinetic, and the third one is ketone ester. And he looked at blood glucose levels after consumption. And I believe in about an hour after consumption, you start to see a significant drop of blood glucose up to about, I believe about 30 to 50 points. And I think, I always would tell people to be careful if you have blood glucose level, if you tend to get into hypoglycemia often, I would definitely have a continuous glucose monitor or have some sugar at hand just in case, just to make sure that you're not going into that too low of a zone. But we have had cases where people have taken it, they've gone down like in the 70s, like 60s, 70s, which is very low for glucose, even if you're fasted, but they're completely fine. They feel really good. And because they're running on ketones, instead of glucose. And one of the hypotheses that this professor said in terms of the glucose lowering effect of exogenous ketone is that the sudden increase of ketones tells your body to actually slow down gluconeogenesis. So slowing down the production of glucose via the other substrates while you have upregulation of ketones.
So from a very practical perspective, if first of all, how much, for myself, I'm fat adapted, I'm in ketosis for mostly somewhere between 0.3 and about 1, typically. If I'm going to take an exogenous ketone, from an expectation perspective, first of all, what volume should I take? What volume and concentration should I take? Secondly, what is my expectation of time to action? In other words, if I'm going to use this for exercise or whatever it is, how long should I take it before I start? What is the expected rise and duration? And is there any after effect? Is there a
crash
crash on the back end?
Well, the short
that metric.
Sorry, yeah, the short answer on the crash is definitely there's no crash. That's why it's so much better than either sugar or even caffeine as a stimulant, because you get a rise of energy, but then it sort of stays there and it tapers off very, very slowly. And it's not even, it's quite negligible in terms of the taper off. If you are taking it for a certain use cases, either sports or performance or cognitive performance, you want to take it about half an hour before, and you will feel the effect, in about 15, 20 minutes, and then you're good to go. In terms of dosage, all the studies that have been conducted with exogenous ketones have been weight matched. So 0.3 to 0.5 gram per kilogram of body weight. However, for our customers, we make it simpler because they're not going to weight match themselves. So what we would recommend is that one dose, which is 10 grams here, is usually enough for cognitive performance. If you want to do it higher dose, like 2 or 3 of these for sports performance, then, for the bigger, like muscular guys, they would do 2.5 or 2 doses, just to make sure that
the dose as a single dose or to space them through a workout.
I would say maximum 3 doses if you're taking a single dose, and then take another whatever in half an hour. I wouldn't take more than 3 doses in a single dose, just for that sort of side effects or like GI issues. I want to avoid that. And because it's a slow release for KETONE-IQ, it's really good that you can space it out because it will release slowly anyway. And another advantage of KETONE-IQ over ketone ester is that it gets converted into BHB in the liver, which means your liver is the gatekeeper. So what we have seen on a dose response study, even when we take 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, which is huge, like I took 8 doses in one seating.
Wow.
And I still don't see my BHB go above 2.5. So there is a limit of around 2.5, which is great because for ketone ester, it's very dose dependent. So the more you take, the higher your blood ketone will go. So there is a chance that you may go into ketoacidosis if you overdose.
Perfect. So this is a safer product to take because it doesn't lean you to the acidosis side of things where you get a performance reduction. Is that yes. Why you changed? Sheryl's just done some masterful research here, and I'm reading what she says here, that you guys used to have a license for the monoester.
Yeah.
And allowed that to expire. Is this the reason why? How did that?
I think one of the main trigger or the main trigger of the event is because we had a $6 million STTR, which is a government contract that we do research for them, with them, using exogenous ketone and that's ketone ester to look at cognitive and physical performance in hypoxia. And we're still running it, and I'm the principal investigator for it. So we are hoping to wrap up and present the results either end of Q1 next year or early Q2. Now, because we're seeing such promising results, not only from a performance point of view, but also from a therapeutic point of view, we want to really scale this up and scale it up in terms of, the business, but also in terms of the cost. And as Sheryl said, if I don't need that high of a ketosis, why can't we make it more scalable, or why can't we produce more of it so that, economy of scale and make it cheaper? And there was, a lot of negotiations going on the business side that I wasn't part of, but I think there was the disagreement around that. But then also we realized in terms of taste, one of the tasks that we did with the government is improvement of taste. So we work with Hormonal, which is a sensory center, research center, who are experts in flavoring, in flavor technology and receptor technology. And they tried everything. They tried all possible sweeteners, both natural and artificial sweeteners, and they have done nothing to ketone ester. In fact, if anything, ketone ester successfully blunt the sweetness from these sweeteners from the response from the participants, which is really bad because literally there's nothing, they've tried dairy to coat it. It's just by nature, the molecule is just so bitter. And we realized R1,3-butanediol tastes mildly better, but it's also much easier to flavor. But, the downside of it is that R1,3-butanediol or 1,3-butanediol has been around for a while. So you can't patent it per se. You can patent, whatever like method of making it, whatever, but the molecule itself is unpatentable. And I think this is the dark side of pharmaceutical area and dark side of nutrition, because everyone wants to own a molecule, wants to own a patent. And we in HVMN, like, especially I am as a scientist, I'm like, if a molecule is good, let's get this to the hands of people. Like, yes, we want to earn money. We need money to run the business. But at the end of the day, if something is good, let's do it. Like, people will know and people will buy it and it will just sell itself. And ketone ester is one of those patentable molecule.
Right.
So people want to push it because, they want to monopolize and make sure the price is at a point where they have to sell it, at a premium price. But ultimately, if we are looking at something that could potentially save lives and like change the trajectory of chronic disease prevalence, as well as improve performance in athletes or in healthy people, or give energy to just go out and work out, just for people, normal day people, okay, I drink this, I feel energetic now, let's go for a walk. That has so much benefit when it comes, at scale. So that's why we decided, in terms of taste, in terms of efficacy, in terms of cost.
Right. Beautiful. So the next chapter that I don't know much about, because for me, a vigorous game of chess tires me out physically. So Sheryl is our athlete. She's a triathlete. She plays competitive tennis. Could we separate myth from fact in terms of a couple of things that I wrote down on this sheet of paper is, where is the value of, I call them EKs, exogenous ketones. I don't know what you're labeling for, but where is the value of exogenous ketones for athletes? Is it brain? Is it musculoskeletal? When should they take it? What are the expectations? Because I know it's been blown up tremendously. Is it a powerlifting thing? Is it an endurance thing? Is it a mental sharpness thing? Sheryl, won't you just start out by sharing some of your personal, you've experimented so much with this stuff, your personal experience, and then also your research, and then have LATT kind of comment about, or separate fact from fiction?
Okay, sure. I would love that. Yes. So just off the top of my head, I love using it before matches. And I honestly think it's the cognitive feature in a tennis match, because you have to keep your wits about you. So I love tiring out my opponents, and then they lose their mental capacity, and then I win. So that's just like my personal experience. But what really intrigued me about exogenous ketones was literally your 2021 review paper. I have to give you props for that paper. That's where my foundation and interest of exogenous ketones for sports came about. And I think it ties in nicely to the Van Doorn 2017 paper, who recommend carbohydrates with the exogenous ketones. And I know that Delta G recommends it. And even on the HVMN blog, you guys recommend carbohydrates. There are research papers that protein and carbohydrates with exogenous, all for the recovery. And I think this is going to be a key feature of the sports performance. It's not so much in the moment, it's can you recover more quickly so that you can increase your training load. So for the Tour de France cyclists or triathletes, I think increasing that load is really where the benefits come in. And I wonder if you could speak to that, because with your product, you sell the product, but I wonder if you could talk about, maybe do we need to bring in protein or carbohydrates or timing? If there's anything like that you could share with us.
Absolutely. I think I would divide it into two categories. One is the acute use sports performance sort of category, and then the other one is the sports recovery category. And the recovery is pretty straightforward. The study that has shown is Puff et al. With Haspel's group, Peter Haspel's group in Belgium. They basically give the cyclists proteins, carbs, and protein, carbs, about 30 grams of protein, 60 grams of carbs, as well as 25 grams of ketone ester after exercise. So half an hour after exercise and half an hour before sleep. After 3 weeks of doing that, they saw an improvement of 15% of work output. And that shows this sort of like increase in recovery and potentially mitigating the overreaching symptoms of overtraining. So that's recovery. I think I can't really hear you.
Sorry, I switched my mic off so that I wouldn't. Was that a comparative study? Was that a controlled study?
Yes.
What was on the other side of that?
That on the other side, I believe, is calorie matched placebo.
So they didn't do a high fat, low carb.
No,
okay.
They did not. They did not. They did purely from a non-ketogenic diet point of view. It's just a supplementation that allows these athletes to use both ketones and glucose for our recovery. And then from acute use point of view, of pre-workout point of view, I would, like you said, I would take it before, half an hour before I work out, and I would categorize it within that. The subcategory is, one is the fuel area, the fuel category, which is giving you energy and glycogen sparing effects, that they have seen in the glycemic clamp, as well as long distance endurance athletes. And then the other category, which I think now is slowly to make sense, is the cognitive benefit. It's the brain benefit, Sheryl, that you were talking about. But no one can actually measure that because it's a lot of subjective feel. I feel great. I feel like I can push further. I feel very clear. And most importantly, for people who have done jujitsu on this KETONE-IQ, they feel that they can see things on slow motion. They can make decisions, split-second decisions, because they are so much clearer in observation as well as execution. So to tie it all in, and really speak about the use of exogenous ketone in performance, I would say is allowing the hybrid system, hybrid fuel system, which allows you to use both ketones and glucose, but most importantly, the effect of ketones that bypass blood-brain barrier and have a significant effect on cognitive performance. And we have seen now, actually, Rob, this is super exciting for you, and you're asking about endurance. All this while, all this research have been focused on endurance and cyclists, endurance exercise, right? Last week, we were at a retreat in North Georgia, and we were presented the results, our first ever clinical trial that HVMN sponsored using KETONE-IQ. And instead of, like all other studies looking at endurance, we decided to do a little anaerobic study. And what we have done is that all these participants ran for 5 kilometers, right? As a sort of pre-fatigue, we looked at RER, sort of respiratory exchange ratio, to see whether they are metabolizing more fat or more glucose. And then right after that, they jump on a bike and they do a wingate, which is 5 times 10 seconds, as hard as you could, at about 75% of your body weight as resistance.
Were these trained athletes?
These are not trained athletes. These are just students, and we have seen. I mean, it's being written as a manuscript right now, so I can't share too much. But I can say for sure that it increased anaerobic performance, as well as overall like fatigue, as they go through the wingate. And that to us is telling us either the glycogen effect is being amplified, in an anaerobic exercise after the running, or it does have a certain cognitive effect that is numbing them from the pain of pushing through.
Well, the interesting thing there is Tim Noakes is really pushing the central governance theory, where the regulator of performance, especially at the edges, at kind of that bonking, that interface where your body slows down, is really regulated by the brain, not the muscles. And I mean, he is one of the experts because he made his whole career on measuring muscle glycogen. As he says, he calls himself a glycogen scientist. So there may be a role for that to play in prolonging the cerebral control of the musculoskeletal activity, because the brain runs out of fuel, or perceives a reduction in fuel, where it's glucose or ketones, earlier than the muscles do. So the other interesting thing about hypoxia is I Dom D'Agostino is one of the guys working in this field, doing a lot of work, and he's working with hyperbaric chambers and superoxygen. But now you talk about hypoxia. So does it work on both sides where you hyperoxygenate somebody, or is it more on the hypoxic side? Is the advantage more when you don't have adequate oxygen for respiration, for aerobic respiration?
Well, what I can say for sure is that during our SCTR, our contract with the government, where we run study on operators in hypoxic chamber and high altitude, we certainly have seen an increase of oxygen saturation in the blood following the consumption of exogenous ketones. So that we know, can happen. And because of the increase in oxygen saturation, normally in hypoxia, you see a cognitive decline. There is a slower reaction time. There is more brain fog. There is, altitude sickness and all of that. We actually saw an improvement in all those areas following the increase in oxygen saturation. So that I can speak for sure. I haven't done any work in hyperbaric chamber with regards to exogenous ketones, so I can't really comment on that. But certainly in the environment of low oxygen, and especially coupled with this recent result of anaerobic exercise, I am tempted to really, see ketone as a very adaptive fuel that can really adapt to not only the stimulus that the skeletal muscle is feeding to the brain, but also to the environment on top of that. So whether you are hypoxic from the environment or hypoxic internally from the anaerobic exercise, ketones are able to produce ATP in that environment and really lessen the gap, the delta that other substrates like glucose may not be providing.
And along those lines, if someone is fat adapted in ketosis, like a carnivore, you mentioned that these Belgian studies included protein and sugar, which is basically a double up on carbohydrates from gluconeogenesis together with ketones. Do you have any information about our carnivore population, our population that is antagonistic to sugar of any form? And is there a benefit to a fat-adapted person in ketosis who's insulin sensitive? Is there a benefit to ketones? And certainly Sheryl is that person, so she lives her life in that state. What are your comments on or experience with it in our ketogenic population?
Before I go, Sheryl, you wanted to add anything on the exercise front? You look like you were going to say something. I
did have a question, but why don't you answer that first, and I'll circle back to that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I think the answer would be similar to what I sort of said earlier to Sheryl on the keto adapted versus non-keto adapted population having exogenous ketone. I think certainly, if you're keto adapted, you probably will be able to metabolize it more efficiently, and depending on the activity, you probably gain more benefit out of it. But nonetheless, exogenous ketone does play a very beneficial role as far as adaptation goes. So if you are not adapted, then this could be a form or a means of adaptation to get adapted. And then for you to like cycling off like keto diet or on and off, then you are actually priming your body to have those enzymes ready to metabolize whenever you will have ketones, whether it's endogenous or exogenous.
Sheryl, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I wanted to kind of draw on your comment about people who are oxygen deprived. And I think that we see in a lot of the obese population is that they become short of breath walking up a flight of stairs or walking across the room. And in fact, studies show that they are no longer able to oxidize fats very quickly, and they turn rapidly to glycolysis and in fact to lactate production. And I think this is one of the key differences between a professional athlete and someone like this, is that they've on a ketogenic diet, right, they upregulate their MCT transporters, which can also shuttle the lactate. So I think there's some kind of evidence that that might be why elite athletes do so well, is because they're better able to shuttle that lactate, sorry. And so now if we look at this population, I'm wondering if this is tying into the study that you did. That's why I was thinking about this. It was really intriguing to me about the potential use of the ketone ester, not necessarily to put someone into ketosis, but to complement whatever it is they are trying to do. Because when we look at this through the lens of carbohydrate addiction, it is a very difficult process for some people to eliminate the carbohydrates from their diet. But if we can bring in exogenous ketones and improve their oxygen burning threshold, we can get them to start moving, to become more active. And there's so much anecdotal evidence that taking exogenous ketones really boosts people's motivation to also get up off that couch. And so this is why I am looking at it therapeutically with our patients. And I really think it all ties down to that study that you just did. So I think that was just kind of like the cool book.
Yeah. I mean, people can't produce enough energy and they feel tired because of metabolic dysfunction. But then if you have exogenous ketone that provides you the energy while fixing your metabolic inflexibility, then that would be perfect example, right? But then another area is COVID patients. So my mother actually had COVID last year, and she was in ICU, and it was quite serious, but she recovered, but she had sort of long-lasting effect where she couldn't go upstairs without feeling really tired and running out of breath. I gave her ketones and she generally felt subjectively much better and much more energetic. And I think that has a role to play on it. And then if you zoom into organ specific as well, if you look at the brain and the heart, what does hypoxia mean to those organs? It means almost death, right? You're looking at stroke, you're looking at heart attacks. And studies have shown in animals and humans is that when ketones are present, you are getting an increased uptake of ketones and metabolism of ketones to really provide the energy that glucose may not provide just via glycolysis itself, and certainly not fat because of the increased oxygen consumption when you metabolize fat and increasing the oxidative damage. So ketone is a very sort of new avenue that could provide that benefit when you're having stroke or traumatic brain injury or ischemia to fill in that energy deficiency. Oh, you're muted again. Rob, you're muted.
I'm switching off my, so you don't hear me rattling around here. Sorry about that. So Sheryl brought up a very good point. All of those things you just mentioned are pretty dramatic in terms of injury and rare. Obesity is so common. And one of the key things about especially central obesity is it has a hypoxic effect. When we do sleep studies on these patients, they're running SATs in the 78 to 80%, and 97% being a normal saturation at sea level. So there is an inherent hypoxia just because of the pulmonary dynamics of obesity. And I wonder if exogenous ketones, because there's a somnolence, there's a fatigue, and it's multifactorial, but whether exogenous ketones may not give those folks that degree of awakening, that degree of stimulation, that degree of functioning under minor hypoxic conditions that elevates mood, elevates capability, reduces fatigue, beyond the adrenocortisol hormonal effect that we so often blame for it. Because hypoxia, I think, is very under-examined and underrated in obesity, particularly when you're 50 to 100 pounds overweight. So I love that part of the conversation. Two questions that just stem out of this for me, and Dom talks quite a bit about this, is, people love to try something. So I take my bottle and I expect an effect right away. Is this a product that can be used ad hoc every now and then, or is it better to keto adapt by taking it on a regular basis every day so that your body adapts to it, so that those synthetic pathways adapt to it? And if it is something that should be taken on a daily basis, what is your dose and timing recommendation?
Say, if I am a typical supplement salesman, I would say take it every day when you wake up till you sleep. Take it nonstop, put it in a jar, just pour it out, in a teapot. But no, I think it comes down to, how I see this is it is a supplement, right? If you want to be healthy, you need to first and foremost fix your foundation, your proper nutrition, your lifestyle, your physical activity. And if you already fix that, you are somewhat metabolic flexible anyway. So there's no need for you to use this product to be keto adapted, right? So you already have the enzymes, you're ready to metabolize ketones at any time. So you can take it based on your use cases. But if your finances allow you to take it on a daily basis, having some form of ketone on a daily basis is better than none, because that effect does compound. And if you like that subjective feel of cognitive clarity as well as energy for you to go work out every day, then by all means, please take it every day. And if you do take it every day, we do advise that you don't take more than 3 doses per day, especially when you're using, for cognitive and then for workout and then recovery. That's, completely up to you. Some people, they do take it more. Obviously that's more than what we can recommend, but that's because they do take it to work out and do really long runs, and they know, and they'll measure their blood ketones as well. They know that while they are working out, they are burning off all that ketones as well. So they need that increased ketone in order to sustain their long runs. So I would say if you're just sitting on your desk doing, your office work and go on podcasts like myself, 1 dose is more than enough to last me for hours. And then I'll take another dose before I work out to give me that sort of energy bump. And then after workout, I'll have 1 just for recovery.
Okay.
One comment I would make is that however many doses you're taking is cheaper than a GLP-1 agonist.
There you go.
Exactly. No, we're just, and because of Sheryl, exploring this in the context of our patient population, which is kind of varied. So along those lines, we've talked about the sports side, but a large part of ketone work is going on with the neuroscience, neurodegenerative place. And, when you talked about ketones having a role in recovery, certainly speaking to a hero of mine and absolutely a mentor is Stephen Cunane, his work with ketones. And he and I have had exhaustive conversations about this. What's interesting about Stephen's work is that he will tell you that they tag ketones and they do PET scans, is that 90% of the fats that are structural fats in the brain cells, because while you can't regrow new brain cells, they're continuously undergoing repair and modification of all their membranes, their outer membrane plus the organelle membranes. And he says that 90% of the ketones that go to the brain are not necessarily used for fuel, but they're used as a substrate for rebuilding fats, or possibly even, and this is something that I'd like to hear your comments on as well, but even as a messenger, as a hormonal type messenger within and between cells, because they're small enough molecules and they can get through aqueous and lipid molecules. But the question that I have, when you talk about athletic recovery, a lot of people kind of separate energy, which is caloric, which is ATP, from substrate, and the human body doesn't do that. What are your thoughts? Do you have any knowledge or experience or science understanding of how much of these exogenous ketones augment substrate provision, especially in the recovery phase, and certainly from the neurocognitive side, versus being available as an instant energy for mitochondria that might be failing in the senescent brain? What is your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the trafficking of these ketones as energy as opposed to nutrients?
See, that is a super interesting question, because I had this conversation, I think, a couple of months back with my supervisor back in Oxford, Dr. Lisa Heather. And she said, what's the hot topic these days in metabolism is metabolites as signaling molecules. So I think this is what's happening with ketones, is ketone, on top of providing you with ATP and energy, and it enters Krebs cycle and electron transport chain directly, it can also act as a signaling molecule. And Buck Institute is doing a lot of work. I think John Newman is doing a lot of work around examining that ketone as a signaling molecule. I gave a couple of talks talking about beta hydroxybutyrylation, which is the effect that ketones have directly on a DNA level, where even there are studies that point towards ketones are HDAC inhibitors that have direct effect on transcription, translation, and really turning on genes that are related to metabolic health or longevity. So I think this is an area that still needs a lot of unpacking, especially when we're talking about acute phase signaling that contributes to recovery or neurodegenerative disease. And then we have to think about, okay, is is this an effect from an acute level, or can this effect be long lasting enough to have a significant effect, you know, when you're older, or do you have to be on high ketosis at all times to really turn all these genes on to make sure that you're getting the benefit out of it?
Right, and you know what's interesting, as you were speaking, I was thinking about exogenous ketones versus endogenous. Production and release of endogenous ketones are hormonally dependent. So they depend on glucagon. They're released by glucagon as part of gluconeogenesis. And insulin kind of blocks that pathway and actually regulates it down the cholesterol pathway as opposed to the ketogenic pathway, which is the HMG-CoA reductase pathway. However, exogenous ketones are pretty much hormone independent. And because they're not regulated by hormones, both in terms of uptake, I'm not certain exactly whether this particular product requires hormonal manipulation at a hepatic level to modify them to send them out. But certainly at the uptake in the brain uptake level, they are independent of hormones. Whereas, for example, the GLUT receptors are required for glucose uptake under the influence of insulin or not. And gluconeogenesis controls release of sugar, conversion of amino acids. Exogenous ketones overrides that. So the question I have, and I've got a talk coming up on this in a few weeks' time, or a few episodes' time, do exogenous ketones change the balance of something called the Randall cycle? And the Randall cycle is where going into a mitochondria, you either have sugar or fat, and there are various things that play around with that. Well, could ketones affect the entry of the different types of substrates into the mitochondria? I don't know. And maybe they even act as a non-esterified fatty acid and a glucose-sparing molecule. Do they preferentially enter mitochondria? Do you know?
I don't know for sure, but I think my theory is that it does affect the Randall cycle in the sense that if you are getting acetyl-CoA directly from BHB, from ketones, then I would assume glycolysis would slow down, as you would, you know, look at the systemic point of view where you have exogenous ketones and you have lower blood glucose. It's basically because of that, because you're down-regulating glucose metabolism. However, there is one paper that look at heart specifically, that when ketones are available, the uptake of ketone is also increased, but this is independent of the uptake of other substrates. So you would think, or one would think, if you are maintaining the uptake of glucose, for example, the cells must have, you know, one way or another, use it down glycolysis, unless that they are still going through glycolysis and they're still taking in glucose, but they're shoving it up to either lactate production or pentose phosphate pathway and using the acetyl-CoA from ketones instead and produce ATP from there. Do we know the answer? I don't know the answer right now, but I think that's a sort of theory on based on what we know of respiration in general.
And on the neurocognitive side, for aging patients, for patients who are maybe have some mild cognitive impairment, or even for patients who have measurable dementia, what is the role of ketones, exogenous ketones, in that population?
So what we have seen in studies is the increase in brain network stability as they age. So they certainly have seen, you know, with ketogenic diet and exogenous ketones, they both have similar effect where via functional MRI, they both increase the interaction between brain regions. And that's definitely a very powerful indicator of whether or not these patients are at risk of getting cognitive impairment diseases later on. And I think just in general, having that increase in brain energy metabolism definitely helps, because what we have seen in Alzheimer's, for example, there is certainly a deficiency in energy or brain energy metabolism, especially when it comes to glucose metabolism. It's almost like an insulin resistance in the brain where you have decrease in glucose uptake as well as utilization of glucose. So providing a completely different class of substrate, which is ketones, using a different pathway, different transporter, could potentially mitigate that gap of deficiency and providing the brain with the energy it needs in order to function.
Right, and it's interesting. I mean, some of the work that this is not my field of expertise, but there is mitochondrial senescence that happens. The structure of the mitochondria changes in those aging brains, and the aging mitochondria certainly are able to use fat and ketones a little bit better than the fresh, very virile, lots of cristae mitochondria. The question then translates across to cancer research. And a lot of cancer cells are glucose dependent as an energy substrate, and that's why the ketogenic diet has benefits in some cancer patients. Is there any evidence that ketones directionally help, or exogenous ketones may assist with cancer therapy, particularly during chemotherapy, or do they possibly augment that? Are they able to be used by some of these bizarre cancer cells?
I think in terms of what I can tell you from researchers who actually buy exogenous ketones from us in the past few years that I've been with HVMN, that I've spoken to, there are certainly cancer researchers who are currently looking at this, either looking at using exogenous ketones to directly improve the condition of the cancer patients, or use it as an adjuvant treatment for chemotherapy, just to increase the efficiency of chemotherapy and really help with the metabolic pathways that could potentially be beneficial to the patients, because as you said, the cancer cells are more dependent on glucose, and if you are on ketogenic diet and have higher ketones, you have lower glucose and lower insulin and all of that. Another use case where researchers found useful is they found that exogenous ketones could also be beneficial to patients undergoing chemo as far as the side effect goes. So the nausea and all of that, which is surprising given the taste. Right. People actually feel less nauseous. So I can't wait for the research to come out, because they are currently running the clinical trials.
Sheryl, what else do you have? I know you've got a whole list of questions, and I've been, as always, hogging the space.
Well, first I want to comment on, in cancer treatment, it's the work of Thomas Seyfried that started it, right, with the press pulse. And, I read all of that. And in my personal life, my father had colon cancer last year, and I put him on the press pulse therapy, and we added the ketones, and he went through chemo like a champ. He said he didn't even feel like he'd ever gone through chemo. He's doing great now. He's in remission. It's all good. But I just wanted, that's just an N of one, the research will back it up. But I just wanted to kind of share that little anecdote so people really know that, yes, it's real. This isn't just something happening in the lab.
I just want to plug one thing. Thomas Seyfried wrote the book chapter in the book that's coming out next year, the Therapeutic Ketogenic book, 62 authors. He's the guy that wrote the big cancer chapter, and just a brilliant chapter. So I just wanted to, for those that haven't heard, the cancer space is still a bit of a black box, but he's unraveled that and speaks to this. So I just want to put that little plug in there. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one this has been very science and dense. I have one kind of like lighter question that I would like to ask you.
That's what happens when Rob and I get together. We can't.
I know, so I'm trying to lighten the mood a little here. All right, so this is feedback from customers. All right, so I buy and recommend the big bottle because it's cheaper. All right, as much as I like to recommend your product because it's cheaper than other options, yes, I like the big bottle. So my beef is that one dose is 35 milliliters, and your dosing cup goes from 30 to 40 milliliters. And I'm wondering if that is something that maybe I could encourage you guys to change.
You are not the first one to say this, and we are aware of this. And we have many, many, many comments. Trust me, I was one of the first people who asked our supply chain. I'm like, hey guys, like, why is this like this? So reason is because the manufacturer that we work with, that's the cup that they have, unless we want to do like a whole production of custom cups. And from recent interviews with our customers, actually, more and more people stop using the measuring cups. They take it from a standard shot glass, or if you do subscribe, you get a little subscriber kit where you have a glass here with exactly 1, 2, 3 doses. That is 35, 70, and 105 mils. That is measured out for you. So that works for a lot of people as well. So I think we are slowly going to phase out the measuring cup and making it look less like a cough medicine or a pharma product, and more into the health supplement area where, you know, people can use it more ubiquitously now.
I love it. Thank you. I use the shot glass, but I thought I'd give you the opportunity to
Yeah.
share with us what happened there.
You subscribe, you get the subscriber welcome kit, and this is part of it. You get 2 of these, I believe.
So let's get back to the deep questions. And as Sheryl actually put this question down, is what is the difference between, if somebody says, you know what, I'm just going to take MCT oil, how do you distinguish MCT from ketones, from your product, from the KETONE-IQ?
I mean, they are completely different like molecule, right? MCT is medium chain triglycerides, where it enters your liver, and it's so-called, you know, if you're looking at C8, which has 8 carbon molecule, they are known to be the most ketogenic MCT, where you can increase your blood BHB via, you know, C8 most efficiently compared to other MCTs, either C6 or C10. Now, R13-butanediol, it directly converts into BHB. So a lot of people, they think, you know, MCT converts to BHB, R13-butanediol converts to BHB, but for some reason, the amount that you can take with the amount you can take with MCT is also proportionate with the risk of GI issues as well. So if you take too much MCT, most people will have diarrhea. And what we have seen in studies is that even at a higher dose, MCT for some reason can only convert up to 0.5 millimolar, unless if you're already on a ketogenic diet and you are already like Sheryl, you know, you are at 0.8 just by waking up, and then you add some MCT, you go above 1. You know, but if you are not on a ketogenic diet, you just add MCT, it won't go that high. Whereas KETONE-IQ, it gives you the flexibility of not being on a ketogenic diet, but also still able to increase your blood BHB level above 1.
Is there any other modality for taking this? I mean, we're all, where it's the big bottle or the little bottle, we're just sipping it, swinging it directly from here. Is there any other way to process this? Can you bake with it? Can you put it in other drink? How are there any other, because this stuff, the reality is this, LATT, this doesn't taste, you know, like a chocolate brownie. No. It is an acquired taste, and I've run out of
tastes like it works.
Exactly right, exactly. So the question is there any other way to do 2 things, to camouflage the taste a little bit better? What are your recommendations there? And perhaps to spread out the dosing, if I am going to use it each day, to spread out the dosing in some other consumable form.
Do you know, we did this post-purchase survey where we asked our customers whether they mix it with anything, or they, you know, what do they mix it with? And it's quite interesting because majority of them, they actually said they don't mix it with anything. They would rather just shot it because the taste is so strong that they would rather not mix it with their favorite drink. Some people, though, they do mix it with, you know, certain either kombucha or carbonated drink is one aspect of one type of drink that does camouflage the taste quite well. So if you want to mix it with any sort of carbonated drinks or carbonated flavored water, that usually go quite well. But as far as cooking goes, we haven't seen anything. I certainly haven't done any cooking with it. And I don't know, I don't think it will alter the molecular structure and affect metabolism of it, but I haven't really tried it myself.
That was really the question: is it heat sensitive? Is it?
It shouldn't be.
Stable.
Yeah, it's quite stable, and we have all the product spec that we sent to researchers because they have to have that for their IRB review and approval. So we know that it is very heat stable and it's shelf stable, but we haven't really baked in anything really in terms of food. With animal work though, we have used well, in my lab, I've got my friends who were studying with these ketone esters. They did use it with the chow diet for the mice, for the rats. They sort of blend it together, and then the rats stop eating it because they don't taste great. So they added Jello in it. So they added Jello, and they've chomped it up. So
another just a question: any anti-inflammatory knowledge with regards to exogenous ketones?
That's a great question. There are a lot of studies that point towards the increase in anti-inflammation effect of ketones, and some may even believe that because ketones or the presence of ketones itself increase uncoupling of the mitochondria. So when you uncouple, you are actually increasing oxidative damage. So a lot of people, oh, well, that's bad. But then if you think about it, you know, a lot of things also increase in coupling or also increase oxidative damage, including just exercising increase oxidative damage. But why is exercise good for us? It's because of mitohormesis, which is a process at which the mitochondria would adapt to an increase in oxidative damage by secreting more antioxidants to cope with that damage. And as a result, it becomes, you know, it becomes an adaptive response for a better antioxidative effect. But also certain stimulus also increase mitochondrial biogenesis, and that increases mitochondrial production, and therefore having that sort of elasticity when it comes to anti-inflammation is a good thing.
You know, when we look at the GI symptoms, we have a pretty large ulcerative colitis Crohn's disease patient population, and that's obviously GI inflammation. I was just wondering if the ketones didn't have a beneficial effect there, particularly because they're not lymphatically absorbed as a form of fat. And I don't know if any work has been done on the GI stability side with inflammatory bowel disease of a variety of different types and regeneration. It's an interesting thought. I mean, this is how my brain works. I've got a lot of questions, not a lot of answers. But
time for the next study.
Well, that's right. I mean, I know the Australians are using a carnivore, high-fat carnivore diet to subdue the inflammatory response in their gut. I just wonder if there's a role either as a fuel substrate or as a source of energy for the entire person as part of that anti-inflammatory protocol.
Yeah. That's interesting because you have to sort of balance it with the GI issue, obviously. But also, I don't know if the anti-inflammatory and antioxidative effect of ketones will be significant enough to have a significant clinical outcome.
Right.
That is yet to be seen, right? When we talk about, for example, traumatic brain injury, anti-inflammation definitely plays a part in mitigating the damage of traumatic brain injury. And the big part of it is also providing the brain the energy that it needs while they are having some dysfunction in the glucose metabolism during an acute phase and during a chronic phase. But as far as if you isolate just having an anti-inflammation effect of ketones in and of itself, I don't know if the effect is significant enough to produce clinical outcomes.
And then a similar, you know, we know that probably the only space right now where a ketogenic way of life is accepted by the general public or the general healthcare public is within the epilepsy spectrum, especially the pediatric epilepsy, where it really does reduce and terminate a lot of epileptic form of activity in the brain. The question is, do you have any knowledge about a more common form of, I like to think of it as a kind of a quasi form of epilepsy, which is migraines? Any role in migraines?
I have anecdotally heard people who have been taking exogenous ketone for migraine. I think it's still slightly behind as far as efficacy goes compared to pharmaceuticals in that area, just because pharmaceuticals are so strong in curbing the pain versus ketones, which may actually help in the long run, but the adaptive period is probably what's putting people off versus something that's, you know, nowadays everyone wants instant gratification, and especially when you are going through such pain, you want it to go off right away instead of having to go through a week of keto diet or, you know, maybe a few days of exogenous ketones before it has a significant effect.
Yeah, it may not just even be in the termination, but again, as we've talked about, is using it on a regular basis to build up that ketone level to get yourself
exactly
that 1.5 to 2 millimolar ketone level. That may, I don't know. Again, I'm because I know that Angela Stanton, who is a ketogenic migraineur who works in the space, she uses a ketogenic diet and salt as a way to terminate or prevent migraines. this may augment those folks, especially early on, and help them to cross that threshold fairly early. I don't know if the concentration of ketones in the bloodstream help, but this is such an exciting field to explore. And certainly anybody, you've been gracious enough to give our folks that come in through us, if they use the Carb Addiction Doc promo code, they can get your product. I think it's a pretty sizable discount. I think it's about 20% discount on the pricing. So you've been generous to allow that to our patient population. And they look down in the show notes on this program. But please, if you've experimented with it as an audience, if you've found benefit, if you found no benefit, please leave comments down below, because that's the feedback the LATT and I, as still with our science hats on, you've kind of got a $sign on your hat as well now. But as scientists, we love to hear that feedback, because it makes us think and it makes us understand the range to which these products are applying. And the biohacking community, both you and I, love that space as opposed to being afraid of it. So Sheryl,
it's the same.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's the same as, you know, this anaerobic study that I just mentioned to you. Like, we never thought that it would have any benefit on anaerobic exercise, but it did. So that made me think, you know, the science about it, and it really opens up so many more avenues around experimenting with it, as well as investigating the mechanism of action of it. So
where's the research going?
The research, as in general, or that particular
research? Where are the hot areas in ketone research?
So I think, you know, as I said, in 2017 to 2019, they were very much performance focused. And then from then on, it's only grown exponentially in therapeutic areas. So we're looking in cancers, we're looking at cardiovascular disease, we're looking at cognitive impairment diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia. And most recently, if you follow Dr. Chris Palmer from Harvard, he is looking at metabolic psychiatry, where he looked at ketogenic diet having comparable, if not better, results compared to the standard treatment currently, which is astounding, because psychiatric, you know, treatments have such variety of outcomes, even given to the people with the same symptoms. So having just a lifestyle intervention and lifestyle treatment, such as ketogenic diet or having exogenous ketones, would have so much difference and significance to a lot of families out there.
No question. I think that neuropsychiatry, we just scratching the surface, and Chris has done some phenomenal work in that regard. Just again, these thoughts just jump into my head. Any benefit in, if someone is on exogenous steroids, corticosteroids, high doses for a variety of different reasons, they really have a sodium metabolism and a hyperglycemic effect. Any knowledge of modification of that effect by taking of the glucogenic or glycolytic effect of steroids by exogenous ketones?
I'm not entirely sure, actually. At least from what we've discussed, potentially it could help lowering the blood glucose level if they're going through hypoglycemia.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't know if, the way I'm thinking is that if the exogenous steroid is affecting glucose metabolism, I'm assuming it will also affect other substrate metabolism. So if you're taking ketone on top of that, in an ideal world, optimally, ketones, those exogenous ketones would directly affect the blood glucose level. But if the steroid itself is already altering the glucose metabolism, it may also alter the pathway of fat and ketone metabolism, which then, you know, goes into the area of the unknown of whether the ketone would act the way we expect it to act.
Yeah, because certainly in our ketogenic population, the use of steroids is very, very disruptive to a ketogenic diet. I'm an awful with diabetes and some of those conditions, and it takes a long, long time to recover from the effects of steroids. So if there's anything we can do to modify it, I'd love to know feedback again from the audience who may have tried this or is willing to biohack and be that N of one. I'm not going to tell you should do the research, but I think I'd be very interested to know whether there is a modifying effect, because it is, the sad part is the side effects of steroid use often makes their benefit less than the effect of the side effects in our population. So many questions. And I think what I love about this, LATT, is we're just scratching the surface. And these are really available for the biohackers out there. And I think the key thing about this is they're safe. They're safe. You really, it's unless you way overdose, you're not going to screw yourself up. Medications and things like that, you can sometimes screw yourself up. Sheryl,
and a lot of people often ask, is that what is the catch? And when you say there is no catch, there is no side effect, they don't believe it, because there's no such thing that's so good that, you know, all these research are pointing towards benefits only without side effects. It's hard to believe.
Apart from the GI side effects, there really is no downside other than the Texas effect, which is more of a good thing is always better. That's, you don't want to go down that road. But Sheryl, any other questions from Sheryl? Did just such a tremendous amount of reading and research, and she's that science bookworm on this. What else have you got to ask? Because I know we've gone way over time. We'll chop this up in a few pieces, but
yeah, I'll make something just kind of really quick. I think that ties into a lot of the various subjects that you've talked about. So many of our patients have multiple of these things. You know, they might have the irritable bowel, the anxiety, depression, insulin resistance, inflammation, all of these things. It's multifactorial what they present us with. And I think that the beauty of the ketone esters is it can, or sorry, your product, the ketones, let's just say
KETONE-IQ.
ketones, I apologize, but bringing in exogenous ketones can get these people who cannot get into ketosis themselves. I have patients who say, I've been carnivore for 4 years and I've never peed ketones on my strips. And so just by giving them the exogenous ketones, it's like an aha moment to them, like to just experience what it feels like to be in ketosis. And they can't do that on their own or haven't been able to. And your product provides them that feeling, and it kind of motivates them to, okay, well, what do I need now to do to tweak my diet so that I'm doing this on my own and supplementing with this product? And people are really starting to react positively in our practice to your product. And I think it's just amazing what it can do for people.
Thank you so much. I mean, like Rob said, we are just scraping the surface, and it's essentially, you know, what, you know, one of the podcasts that I've been on with Lisa Tamati, based in New Zealand, her mom has gone through aneurysm, stroke, concussions, and she has been struggling to get into a significant level of ketosis. But with this, she could finally get into ketosis, and she saw significant improvement in cognition. And it was so heartwarming to see her message and her email coming to us, and how grateful she was. And just because, you know, like Rob said, it's like the surface, because all these different hormonal imbalance as well as metabolic dysfunction is causing people to not achieve a ketosis in a conventional manner or in a simple manner, and therefore they need these external supplements that help them get there first, or even upregulate the enzymes needed for ketone metabolism, as well as improving their metabolic flexibility in the meantime for them to get into ketosis. Oh, you muted.
You know, I keep doing that. One last question about the company itself. I have a very large international audience. I mean, I've got patients all over. In fact, a number in Malaysia and Singapore, and a big breast cancer oncology group in Malaysia. So at least, sorry, in Singapore. So what is obviously we understand the American market. If I want to buy the product, I have to come to your website to buy it. What about internationally? How do I order it? How do I get it internationally? And is it going to be available at some point, like a 5-hour energy, or what is your rollout? What is your expansion of availability of the product?
So right now we are already, all these small shots are already available in retail. They are in Sprouts, they're in Central Market. We're looking at many other different retails. Our head of retail, Lorenzo, is working really hard to really, you know, push it out and also make people know and educate people around ketones. And as far as international shipping goes, we do actually ship internationally. So if you go to our website, hvmn.com, and order it from there, it will give you an option if your country is covered for the shipment. So we're working with an international shipping company that ship to most countries overseas. And if you are in America, obviously you can directly order from the website or Amazon or the feed or any other third party. I think a lot of people starting to want to wholesale it. We've got requests from Europe and UAE wanting to wholesale. My friends in Malaysia wants to wholesale it. So we'll see. I mean, it's a product that, you know, even though it doesn't taste great, but people starting to want it more because people know that it works. And the more you drink it, the more you actually get used to the taste, honestly. And we also have our, you know, we are available on social media as well, like at HVMN, Health via Modern Nutrition. Myself at LATT MANSOR, you can find on all Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. And we have our Health via Modern Nutrition podcast that I just recorded with, you know, Rob, and we released 2 weeks ago. Been performing really well, and I know you're not tooting your own horn. I can say from objective point of view, you know, we're getting a lot of listens there. I think people are really enjoying the scientific chats that we have, and also the explanation around insulin resistance, glucagon insulin, as well as chronic diseases.
No, I really appreciate this whole discussion. I know we bounced around a lot, but that's kind of how we are within the space right now. It's kind of this still head explosion. It is the Big Bang Theory beginning to happen, if that makes sense, that there's so many applications and so many experiments that we can do. And I think the most important thing that you've quite frankly said to me, especially with my educated audience that are interested, they're living on that cutting edge of trying new things, is that it is so safe that even if it doesn't work, it's not going to do you any harm. You may lose a little bit of money, but other than that, the experiment is well worth doing. And I'm a physician. I'm very cautious when it comes to the downside. We always evaluate risk first before benefit. But I would urge people out there, whatever conditions you have, be objective about it. Try it for a week, or a couple of weeks, and then don't try it, and do that comparison. But there's no downside to this. And then leave a comment, give us the feedback, benefit or not, we learn from that. Sheryl, you wrote a beautiful conclusion. Do you want to go ahead and just give LATT the conclusion, read that conclusion?
Now you muted.
My bad. I think I kind of did in the last thing I said, but in conclusion, I just wanted to really thank you for providing this product to our patients. Like I said, these patients are just feeling things that they have not been able to feel their entire lives. And it's just so rewarding to witness that. So thank you so much for giving us your time. I think this has been a really wonderful conversation and able to get out good information to people. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And thank you, Rob. You know, as rewarding as it is for you guys, it's even more rewarding to me because I'm a scientist at heart, and before I'm an HVMN employee, I'm a scientist, and before I'm a scientist, I'm a human, and I'm a human that cares about health and fitness for myself and for other people. And to know that I'm working on something that has such positive impact on other people's lives via your hands, it's the most gratifying feeling ever. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time and your expertise. Thanks, LATT. Bye-bye.